Elias Thorne was a man defined by what he had lost. He had lost his wife to a fever in the spring. He had lost his father to the unforgiving rock of a silver mine years before that. He lived on the forgotten edge of Prosperity Gulch, a town whose name was a boast it had not yet earned. His earthly possessions were few: a worn set of tools, their wooden handles smoothed by the sweat of 2 generations. A stoic, grey horse named Granite, whose quiet companionship was the only society Elias required. And a heavy, leather-bound journal filled with his father's precise, angular script. That journal was the most valuable thing he owned. It was not a diary of feelings or a record of days. It was a manual for survival. His father had been an engineer in a colder, harder land before chasing dreams of silver to this valley. He had documented everything: the thermal capacity of granite, the insulation properties of packed earth, the behavior of wind over a ridgeline.
The subtle language of the seasons, written in the frantic activity of squirrels and the early departure of geese. It was a book of whispers from the earth itself, transcribed by a man who knew how to listen. In the late summer of 1888, Elias began his work. He did not build in the valley with the others. He did not fell the proud pines for a cabin that would stand tall against the sky. Instead, he went to the south-facing slope of Miller's Ridge, a long, sun-drenched hill of granite and packed soil that the townsfolk used for nothing more than grazing a few goats. He chose his spot with the same care a jeweler might use to select a raw diamond. He consulted his father's journal, cross-referencing notes on sun angles and winter drift patterns. Then, he began to dig. His plan was simple and, in the eyes of Prosperity Gulch, profoundly foolish. He was not building a house. He was carving one from the hill itself. A 3-room dugout, a burrow, a home that would be more earth than timber.
Out of courtesy, not a need for permission, he went to see the mayor. Mayor Thompson was a man whose considerable girth was matched only by his considerable sense of self-importance. He sat behind a large oak desk, a symbol of the progress and permanence he believed he was bringing to the gulch. Elias explained his plan quietly, his hands resting on his knees. He spoke of geothermal stability, of using the Earth's mass to insulate against the extremes of both summer heat and winter cold. The mayor listened with a deepening smirk. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. "A hole in the ground, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are civilized men here. We build with timber and pride, standing tall to meet our fortunes. We do not dig holes and live like badgers." Elias did not argue. He had expected nothing less. He simply nodded and left. The story, however, did not stay in the mayor's office. It spread through Prosperity Gulch like a grass fire. Elias Thorne, the quiet widower, had gone mad with grief. He was digging his own grave. Doctor Hemlock was the next to offer his unsolicited wisdom. He was a man of science, a graduate of an Eastern college, and he saw it as his duty to protect the townsfolk from their own ignorance. He found Elias at the worksite, stripped to the waist, his back slick with sweat as he swung a pickaxe into the stubborn earth. "Thorne," the doctor began, not bothering with pleasantries. "This is folly. You'll get lung sickness. The damp will get into your bones. No man can live in the earth without succumbing to its humors. It is unhealthy. It is primitive." Elias paused, wiping his brow with the back of his forearm. "The earth is warmer than the winter air, Doctor," he said, "and drier than a poorly chinked cabin in a blizzard." Dr. Hemlock scoffed, adjusting his spectacles. "Superstitious nonsense. We have modern stoves. We have science. We do not rely on such peasant thinking." He left,
convinced he had done his civic duty. The most vocal critic was Bartholomew Croft. Croft was the richest man in the valley, a rancher whose herds of cattle seemed to multiply overnight. He was a monument to the town's aspirations, a man of new money and loud opinions. While Elias dug into the hill, Croft was building on the opposite side of the valley. His was a house of staggering ambition. 2 stories tall, with a wide veranda and, its most celebrated feature, a parlor with 3 enormous panes of glass shipped all the way from St. Louis. These windows were a statement. They declared that a man like Croft was not afraid of the wilderness. He could build a house of light and air and command the landscape to be his view. He would often ride his fine black stallion past Elias's project, pausing to look down on the growing pile of excavated earth. "Still digging your grave, Thorne?" he would boom, his voice echoing in the clear air. The name stuck. The project became known as the Grave, or, among the gossiping women at the general store, Thorne's Folly. Soon a new phrase entered the local lexicon. When a man embarked on a pointless or foolish task, the others would shake their heads and say he was pulling a thorn. Elias heard the whispers. He saw the smirks. He ignored them all. He had his work. He had his father's journal. He had Granite, who would stand patiently for hours, waiting for the next load of earth to be hauled away. The labor was brutal, methodical, and solitary. Every day, from sunup to sundown, the valley echoed with the rhythmic chunk of Elias's pickaxe and the scrape of his shovel. He was not just digging a hole. He was engineering a shelter. He followed his father's diagrams to the letter. The entrance faced due south, angled at precisely 23 degrees. This, the journal explained, would allow the low winter sun to penetrate deep into the main room, but would be shaded by a small, carefully constructed overhang when the summer sun was high in the sky. He did not dig straight into the hill. He carved a gentle, curving entrance hall, a design intended to break the force of any direct wind. The 3 rooms were modest: a main living space, a small bedroom, and a 3rd room, connected to the outside by a separate, smaller door, which would serve as a stable for Granite and a cold storage area. He spent a month just on the ventilation system. He knew Dr. Hemlock's warning about dampness was not entirely baseless, but it was born of ignorance, not science. His father's design showed how to prevent it. He painstakingly drilled a narrow flue up through 20 feet of rock and earth, lining it with smooth stones. It emerged on the top of the hill, capped with a cleverly designed stone that would keep out rain and snow while allowing moist air to be drawn out by the heat of a small stove. A second, lower intake vent, hidden near the floor, would draw in fresh, dry air, creating a constant, imperceptible circulation. He lined the raw earth walls not with wood, which would rot, but with a thick plaster he made himself from clay, sand, and lime. He worked it into the walls with his bare hands, smoothing it until it was hard and clean. He was a man possessed by a quiet, unshakable purpose. The town watched his progress with a mixture of pity and amusement. They saw a man toiling endlessly, creating a home fit for a mole, while progress and prosperity were being built from fine timber all around them. Croft's mansion was completed in early October. He threw a grand party, and the whole town came to marvel at the polished floors and the magnificent glass windows. From his parlor, you could see across the valley to Miller's Ridge. Croft, a glass of whiskey in his hand, pointed a thick finger at the dark scar on the hillside. "There," he announced to his guests. "There is Thorne's Folly, a testament to madness. Let it be a lesson to any man who thinks the old ways are better than the new." Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Elias, meanwhile, was fitting the door. It was his masterpiece.
2 layers of thick oak planks with a tightly packed layer of wool insulation between them. It fit into its stone frame with less than a quarter-inch of clearance on all sides. He hung it on massive iron hinges he had forged himself. When that door was closed and barred, the dugout was no longer a cave. It was a vault. As autumn deepened, Elias began to notice the signs. They were small things, invisible to the proud citizens of Prosperity Gulch, but to him, guided by his father's journal, they were as loud as a fire bell in the night.
The squirrels were not just gathering nuts. They were stripping the pine trees bare with a desperate, frantic energy. The beaver down at the creek had built their dam 2 feet higher than usual, reinforcing it with a thick wall of mud and stone. The migratory birds were gone. Not just the geese, but even the hardier finches that usually lingered until the first snow. The sky was empty and silent. One evening, a profound quiet fell over the valley. The crickets stopped. The coyotes did not howl. There was a strange, metallic scent on the air, and the barometric pressure, which he tracked with a simple device his father had designed, had plunged. Elias opened the journal to a page marked with a skull and crossbones. His father's words were stark. When the animals hoard with desperation, when the birds flee before their time, and when the air itself holds its breath, do not be deceived by a clear sky. This is the preamble to the White Death. A winter that does not just visit, but conquers. A cold that breaks stone and freezes the marrow in your bones. A flicker of something, pity perhaps, or a lingering sense of community, made him consider warning them. He pictured himself walking into the general store, interrupting the checker games and idle gossip. He imagined trying to explain his fears, trying to make them understand the silent warnings of the squirrels and the birds. He could already hear their laughter. They would call him a doomsayer. They would accuse him of trying to frighten them to justify his own madness. Pulling a thorn, they would say, shaking their heads as they cast him out. Their pride was a fortress. He could not breach it. He turned away from the thought and focused on his own final preparations. He hauled the last of his split firewood inside, stacking it neatly against a wall. He filled every container he had with water from the spring. He led Granite into the small, clean stable room and barred the door. Then he walked back to the main entrance, pulled the massive oak door shut, and slid the heavy iron bar into place. The sound of it locking echoed in the sudden, profound silence. Outside, the world was oblivious. Inside, Elias was ready. The catastrophe began on January 12th. It did not arrive with a flurry of gentle snowflakes. It came as a thief in the night. First came the cold. It was not a normal cold. It was a solid, physical presence, a plunge into an abyss of temperature that felt like a planetary event. The mercury in the town's official thermometer in front of the mayor's office dropped 40 degrees in a single hour. Then it froze, and the glass tube shattered. Then came the wind. It screamed down from the northern peaks, a single, sustained, mythic blast of violence. It was a physical blow to the town of Prosperity Gulch. The first thing to fail was Bartholomew Croft's pride. The magnificent panes of St. Louis glass in his parlor, stressed by the catastrophic temperature differential, exploded inward with a sound like a cannon shot. The wind, now inside the house, tore it apart from within. It ripped paintings from the walls, shattered furniture, and howled through the grand halls like a vengeful spirit. Croft's mansion became a hollow, frozen shell in less than an hour. The rest of the town fared little better. Their proud timber cabins, built to stand tall, were sieves in the face of this wind. The cold found every crack in the chinking, every gap under the doors. Fires in hearths
no matter how high they were stoked, were useless. The heat was stolen away as quickly as it was generated. Water in barrels froze solid. Food in pantries turned to blocks of ice. The town's water tower, a symbol of their modern infrastructure, groaned, and then its main seam split with a deafening crack, spilling a solid cylinder of ice onto the frozen ground.
The supply lines were gone. The social structures were paralyzed. The very concept of prosperity was frozen dead. And then the snow began. It was not snow. It was a horizontal blizzard of fine, hard ice crystals, driven by the hurricane-force wind. It did not fall, it attacked. Inside the grave, Elias Thorne sat at his small wooden table, reading his father's journal by the steady, calm light of a kerosene lamp. The geothermal heat radiating from the deep earth kept the ambient temperature at a stable and survivable 55 degrees. His small, efficient stove, burning only a single small log every 2 hours, brought the living space to a comfortable warmth. The roar of the storm, the shriek of the white death outside, was a distant, muffled hum. It was a sound from another world. Granite rested peacefully in the stable room, warm and sheltered, occasionally stamping a hoof on the dry earth floor. Elias was not just surviving, he was living. For 3 days, the world outside ceased to exist. For the people of Prosperity Gulch, it was an eternity in a frozen hell. Families huddled together under every blanket they owned, their breath crystallizing in the air inside their own homes. The wood piles were dwindling at an alarming rate. The food was inedible unless thawed, a process that cost precious fuel. Despair was setting in. On the morning of the 4th day, a frantic pounding came at the heavy oak door of the dugout. Elias, startled from his reading, slid the bar back and opened it a crack. The wind howled, trying to force its way in. A figure, covered in snow, looking more like a ghost than a man, stumbled forward. It was Doctor Hemlock. His face was a mask of frostbite, his fine spectacles were gone, and his eyes were wide with a terror that had burned away all of his intellectual arrogance.
"Thorne," he croaked, his voice raw. "Please, my wife. She's fading. We have no more wood. It's so cold." Elias said nothing. There was no, "I told you so." There was no hint of triumph. He simply opened the door wide and stood aside. He helped the doctor bring his shivering wife inside, wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, and sat her near the stove. He handed them both a tin mug of hot broth. Dr. Hemlock looked around the warm, dry, secure space. He looked at the calm efficiency, the stacked firewood, the serene atmosphere. He looked at the man he had called primitive and foolish. And he began to weep. The doctor's desperate journey was not a secret for long. Somehow, the word passed from one freezing house to the next, a desperate, wind-torn whisper of hope. Thorne's folly. The grave. It was the only warm place in the valley. That afternoon, the procession of the humbled began. They came in small, huddled groups, families clutching their children, their faces wrapped in scarves, their bodies battered by the relentless wind. They staggered up the slope to the dark scar on the hill, to the one place they had all mocked. Each time the scene was the same. Elias would open the door. He would see their shame, their desperation, their frozen misery. And he would simply stand aside and let them in. He gave up his own bed. He organized the space without a single wasted word. The children and the elderly were placed in the warmest room, closest to the stove. He showed the women how to ration the food, how to make a thin but nourishing stew from his supplies. He became their silent, unquestioned leader. The man who had been the town outcast was now the town's only hope. By the 5th day, more than 60 people were sheltered within the 3 small rooms. The air was thick with the steam of human breath, but the ventilation flue, his father's ingenious design, drew the moisture up and out, keeping the space from becoming dangerously damp. The last to arrive came on the 6th day.
2 figures, barely recognizable, stumbled through the blizzard and collapsed against the door. Elias opened it to find Mayor Thompson and Bartholomew Croft. They were broken men. The mayor's face was grey with exhaustion and failure. Croft, the proud rancher, was the worse of the two. His fine leather gloves had offered no protection. His hands were wrapped in bloody rags, his fingers blackened with severe frostbite from his futile attempt to board up the shattered windows of his ruined mansion. They looked up at Elias, their eyes begging for a mercy they did not deserve. Elias looked down at them, his expression unreadable. Then, just as he had for all the others, he stood aside and let them enter the warmth. He spent the next hour carefully tending to Croft's hands, cleaning them and applying a pine sap salve his father's journal had described for treating frostbite. He worked in complete silence. The storm raged for 9 full days. Inside the dugout, nearly 100 souls from Prosperity Gulch survived. They huddled together in the warm, secure darkness, listening to the muffled roar of the world ending outside. They lived on Elias's foresight. They drank his water. They ate his food. They were warmed by his fire. When the wind finally died and a weak, watery sun appeared, they emerged into a new world. The valley was a landscape of devastation. Houses were buried to their eaves in snow. Roof lines were shattered. The proud town of Prosperity Gulch looked like a forgotten ruin. A week later, after the survivors had dug out and taken stock of the wreckage, a town meeting was called. They did not gather in the mayor's office or the ruined church. They gathered at the foot of Miller's Ridge, in front of the entrance to the dugout that had saved them all. Mayor Thompson stood before the assembled crowd. He was a smaller man now, his arrogance scoured away by the freeze. He looked at Elias, who stood quietly by the door of his home. "I have something to say," the mayor began, his voice thick with emotion. "We called this place a folly. We called it a grave. We laughed at this man. We called him a fool for digging in the dirt while we built with pride." He paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Our pride is now in ruins. Our homes are shattered. We were the fools. He was the wise man." He turned to face Elias directly. "You were right, and we were wrong. You tried to tell us in your own way, and we mocked you for it. On behalf of this town, I apologize, and I thank you. You saved us." Bartholomew Croft stepped forward, his bandaged hands held carefully in front of him. "My pride built a house of glass," he said, his voice raspy. "It shattered in the first gust. Elias Thorne built a house of humility and earth. It sheltered 100 people from the end of the world. I was wrong. He was right." Doctor Hemlock was the last to speak. "My science was useless," he said simply. "His wisdom was salvation." All eyes turned to Elias. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He looked out at the faces of the people who had scorned him, and he saw only weary survivors. "Pride doesn't keep you warm," he said, his voice calm and even. "A thick wall of earth does." He gestured to the hill behind him. "Learn from the mountain.
It knows how to endure. It bends to the wind by not standing against it. It holds the warmth of the sun long after it has set. That was all he said. The rebuilding of Prosperity Gulch began the next day, but they did not rebuild as they had before. The plans for grand, tall houses were abandoned. Instead, they came to Elias. They brought him paper and pencils, and he, consulting his father's journal, sketched out new designs. Houses with deep foundations. Homes built into the slopes of the hills, not on top of them. Structures with smaller windows facing south and thick, insulated walls facing north.
The principles of the dugout became the architectural law of the land. The phrase "pulling a thorn" was reborn. It no longer meant to engage in folly. It came to mean acting with uncommon foresight, to prepare when others celebrate, to trust in quiet, practical wisdom over loud, fashionable pride. Bartholomew Croft is pulling a thorn, a man might say, seeing the rancher digging a deep, stone-lined root cellar. He's a wise man. Elias Thorne lived for another 40 years. He never remarried. He never moved down into the town that now revered him. He stayed in his dugout on Miller's Ridge, a solitary, constant presence watching over the valley. The townsfolk brought him gifts of food and supplies, but what they truly sought was his counsel. They asked him when to plant, reading the signs in the soil with him. They asked him about the coming winter, learning from him the language of the birds and the squirrels. He became their sage, their teacher, the quiet heart of a community that had learned its most important lesson through ice and fire. He died peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, at the age of 81. The people of the valley buried him on the crest of the ridge, overlooking the entrance to his home. They did not erect a grand tombstone. Instead, they brought a master stone carver from a city far to the east. He carefully chiseled an inscription into the heavy stone lintel above the dugout's oak door. It did not list his date of birth or death. It simply said, "Elias Thorne. He listened to the earth, and the earth sheltered us all." His home was never lived in again. It was preserved exactly as he had left it, a permanent monument and a silent, eternal lesson in the enduring power of humility.